Dr. Nadowski, if you would tell us what verbal operants, what that means.
All right. Well, in the olden days, or what someone might refer to as a traditional approach, language has been subdivided by receptive and expressive. Mm-hmm. So receptive is more like the listener behavior. So it would entail, having objects out and saying something like, hand me the cat. And then the child listens, scans the array, and hands over the cat. And then expressive was kind of just a dumping ground where any time that the child engaged in some sort of response that was more considered speech, whether it be with it doesn't have to actually come out of their mouth. It could be with a augmentative communication device, through a PEC symbol, speaking, something like that. That was always called expressive.
Okay.
But B.F. Skinner wrote a book called Verbal Behavior, and in that book, he basically provided an analysis of language and showed that there's actually many different functions. So he actually looked at how when we're engaging in these behaviors, there's different functions of it, and how if you just teach one of those functions, that you don't necessarily get the rest.
And I think our parents, if you're following so far, and don't worry because we're going to break it all down, this is part of the reason why so many of you write to me and say, well, my child has labels, and they sit at school and they label, but when is my child going to have a conversation? Right. When is my child going to be able to answer a question? When is my child going to ask me a question? And this is where the divide is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So going back to the olden days, what people used to do was they would kind of think it as like, we're going to teach this child the meaning of these words, and once they know the meaning of the words, they're just going to use them in language, right? So they would do the receptive. They'd put out the items, give me cat, child gives it, so they would say, okay, great. The child hears the word cat, can scan an array, and find the cat. Awesome. Now I'm going to hold up a cat, and I'm going to say, what is it? And the child's going to say, cat. And then they would do both of those two things, the receptive and the traditional expressive, and then they would be done with it.
Right. Good. We've taught language to the child. The child
knows cat.
The child knows cat, but for all intents and purposes, the child can't use cat in a real-world situation. They're not having a conversation about a cat. And I firmly believe that that's where all autism parents want to get, is to the point where, whether it's spoken or through a device, you want to be able to have that give and take of cat.
And let's pretend for a minute that it's not cat, but let's say it's goldfish or something, right? And we've taught them the word goldfish. So now the parents know the child loves goldfish, and everyone's thinking, great, now he has a way of asking for goldfish because we've taught him the meaning of that word. Right. But the child never asks for goldfish and maybe continues to whine or tug at your arm or whatever and point instead. So it hasn't actually been taught that there's a functional use of the word goldfish, that when I say fish, I can get a fish.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we're talking about the crackers, by the way, probably goldfish, right?
Yeah.
And which is another point, that there's lots of different kind of goldfish. There's the goldfish cracker, and there's the goldfish that's in your little goldfish bowl, and then there's the goldfish that are in the koi pond at another place, that teaching all the different meanings of things.
Right. So so basically what Skinner did is he subdivided language into what we call the verbal operants.
All right. Okay. And now I will just give you a little bit of front loading that this week our jargon terms so far, we did manned on Tuesday, and today was tact.
Okay.
So they've heard a little bit about that, although I'm sure that it would be better if you explained those things, because you are the expert and I am not.
Okay. So in the case of a man, the best way to remember it is think of the word command. And it's basically making a request. So when kids ask for things, so the function of them using the word is to gain access to the item. So in the case of a goldfish cracker, when the child says fish, if then they're given an item and that actually reinforces that response, then we know the function of that was a request, so a manned.
And we all see this all the time, that the child goes cookie, 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 or googie, 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 as the case may be, right?
Yeah.
Depending on what their abilities are, but they want it. Juice, and in the beginning it's just the one word.
And they will start, in typical development, they will start doing those things before they're even a year old. So between 9 and 12 months, kids are manding, whether they're just saying more over and over again, or whether they have a couple words like juice. They might even use sign language. I know a lot of parents these days, just to get their kid to be able to communicate right away, are teaching them basic signs. And all of those are considered mands.
Yeah, more. That was the one that we taught Jem. More, we want more. Okay, so Is that the first on the list of verbal operants, mand, or is echoics before that?
There isn't any necessarily order to it. And research maybe someday will tell that, but I know some people have said, oh, well, you need to do echoics first because they need to be able to imitate the word if you're teaching it to them. So if you're trying to teach them to man for fish, you need to be able to have imitation of, say, fish. But I think that also a lot of kids are not going to be motivated to imitate you. So you're not going to just start with some random sound or whatever for imitation. So it's better to start with things that have a man function.
Okay.
So figure out what the child likes and then go with those items and get them to at least say an approximation. So it doesn't actually have to have a perfect articulation just to get the item, initially. So it's like you're kind of doing these things together a little bit.
Okay.
A lot of times you're using the echoic. The echoic is just when you say something and then the child imitates you.
Okay.
What you've said.